Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Time with Guildmaster Gaming. Today, we are talking with Brenna Goodwin-McCabe and her film, I Can't Go On. It's a short film that we'll be seeing at Film Quest, I guess on the virtual part of it that you were saying, as we were talking earlier. So, Brenna, please tell us about yourself and your movie.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's really lovely. I'm a Canadian filmmaker and writer, and I'm the creator of the short film I Can't Go On. As you mentioned, we'll be playing Film Quest. Um, I began most of my film studies studying Gothic literature. I ended up writing a thesis on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, both of which were really big influences. So to be in a horror festival and to be around horror people, we're really excited about it.
So, I'm going to throw something out, a little side note there. You're into Pan's Labyrinth. Uh,
Yeah,
did you see who is in one of the other short films this year?
I did. I kind of lost my mind a little bit. It's really exciting
Yeah,
to
we
kind
don't
of.
know. We don't know if he'll be there, but he was there last year with some of the stuff they were doing as a special guest. So,
That's phenomenal. I'm looking forward to checking that one out. It looks really fantastic.
see, there's a teaser for everyone because we didn't say anything more than that.
It's a good teaser. It's definitely a good one. Draw some
Okay,
people in.
so you've already given that. Part of the inspiration that you've drawn off for yourself is like Pan's Labyrinth and Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Now, I could see where Frankenstein definitely played right into your short. So, um, kind of going along that, we know that's an inspiration. What other inspirations or how did that inspire you to come up with I Can't Go On?
Yeah, well, I Can't Go On, it's about an alienated young woman and the body she discovers in her apartment elevator that's been left to fester under the heels of her unconcerned neighbors. So we really dwell into the kind of gothic archetypes of this strange environment that's kind of monstrous, and there's this horror at the very sight of it. And at the same time, we're dealing with surreal elements of our character discovers this body, and yet, despite that being this great and monumental horror, no one seems to care other than her that there is this body rotting in the elevator, and that becomes the kind of main motivation of our story. And I think many of the influences I had deal with similar issues. One of the major influences, filmic wise, was the film Delicatessen, which is this phenomenal French film created by the director who also did Amelie and City of Lost Children. And it essentially takes place in this apartment building after the apocalypse has happened. So, despite the fact that the apocalypse has happened, you're not seeing zombies, you're not seeing all of this post apocalyptic grossness happening. It's instead the lives of the apartment building that continue despite the fact that there has been this great horror. And they all deal with it differently, and many have reverted to cannibalism. But at the same time, lives are continuing, the mail continues to be delivered, people continue to practice music. It's this very strange realm, and I think that's the one that I find really a huge amount of inspiration from, of like something horrible has happened and we should all acknowledge it, but at the same time things are continuing, and there is a sort of horror to that movement of something where it should be a stopping point and yet it isn't. And I find that a really interesting kind of place to draw from.
I have to agree with you. Even looking at it different angle, my background is sociology.
Ah, yeah.
So that whole desire of wanting to maintain the normal
Mm,
and like you've got to hear in the death or after you're talking about an apocalypse, but they see the same thing as even like after earthquakes and major flooding, how people really try to maintain that,
yeah.
even though, and I guess almost delude themselves. And you kind of touch on that in this film, is the way it
Yeah.
seems. Um, so as we've got this now, the background, and we're kind of touching on it here, since this seems like it's pretty encapsulated story in itself, but at the same point, it leaves it very open-ended. So
Yeah.
is there any desire you have of moving this into either another film or into something bigger?
Definitely, definitely. I think in general, it's a theme that'll pop up in my work moving forward. But we're currently developing this short into a feature film that'll also be called "I Can't Go On," And it is sort of inspired by the short. It's not a continuation necessarily of the story exactly, but I imagine it more of the same building but a different floor, that sort of philosophy. And both the short and this feature are inspired by my time in Vancouver, living in a building that was slated for demolition. My mother and I, we were the last occupants of the building. And we discovered that not only were we the last occupants of our building, we were the last occupants of any of the surrounding buildings that were all being demolished. So it became a really creepy environment because you were never sure if you were completely alone, if there was maybe somebody had broken into the building. All of the units were unlocked, so you could kind of just wander through. So that has been the inspiration for this feature of taking place in this environment and making it into a modern day haunted house where it isn't necessarily a house, it's an apartment building.
That has a lot of meat for story there. I just being a horror writer myself, I never thought about that aspect of what you just gave of being the last in the building,
Yeah.
even if it's not apocalyptic. It just
No, but you're surrounded, you're essentially living in a rotting body, which is kind of the organic material I used in my short. We really wanted to make the building in our short feel like it was alive, like it was this kind of witness to the events, and the elevator sort of a mouth that was opening and closing on this body. And that's something that we now get to expand on in the feature of I tend to pitch it as a magic school bus from hell, where our main character is kind of running through the veins of this building, and she's surrounded by these organs as they're slowly releasing necrotic ooze and all sorts of horrific things.
I will say I did catch the symbolism of the mouth and the eye that you used. So
Mm,
very well done. I like that. It was a
thank
nice
you.
way of kind of portraying that there's more going on as a witness and all
Yeah,
the other senses that we don't normally get to consider. Uh,
yeah.
was
Definitely. I'm glad that's coming across well.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about your inspiration for this film and what might go forward with it as the story. But
Mhm.
what about the film itself? Whereabouts are you in your festival run with I Can't Go On?
Well, we've had the good fortune of playing at some amazing festivals across North America. We played at Blood in the Snow in Toronto. We played at La Femme International in LA, and then a few amazing local festivals: Vancouver Short Film Festival, the Short Circuit Pacific Rim Film Festival, Vancouver Horror Show, which we're a huge fan of, and now FilmQuest. And for us, I think now that we played at a few different festivals, from typical horror festivals to kind of more sweeping festivals, we've gotten to see different audience reactions, which has been really cool. We are nearing the end of our festival run. We're still waiting to hear from a few festivals, but we're getting a little close to the end, which is definitely a fun and sad thing, but we're really excited to be with FilmQuest. I think it's been a dream to be a part of a festival like FilmQuest. I've had it on kind of the big notice board of career things I want to do. And with something as personal as and as exciting as this short film, we're really pleased to be here with you.
Okay, so I'll just throw it out. You're going to be able to make it to Film Quest this year?
Unfortunately, not in person, unfortunately, but we will be there in spirit, and we have all of the virtual selection, so I will be watching all of that and being from afar as the Canadian eye on all of this incredible horror. But yeah, we're
Yeah.
very sorry to be missing it in person.
I know so many people when I talk to them, it is a tough thing to do anymore because of the cost of travel and especially
Yeah,
doing international travel. Even if
yeah,
it's just across the border between Canada and the United States, it causes a lot of complications.
it
So
does.
kind of playing along with the what we've already kind of picked up as the theme. So here you're coming to the end of your festival run. Have you been approached about a possible life after for the movie?
A few interested parties. Yeah, nothing concrete. I think, we would love to be able to release this somehow. We with the feature coming, especially, we would love to drum up some attention, some interest, but I think my main goal is to really just show the film to as many as we can right now. And if people come forward interested in the film and helping assist its life beyond the festival circuit, then that's amazing, and we would love to hear it. But yeah, we're excited to see the audience reaction. Even though we can't be there in person, in previous festivals we played at where we also can't attend, we've had some people reach out that have really enjoyed the film, and we're really just happy to be a part of that kind of viewing experience of these people from all around the world being able to see our film and come away with very personal interpretations. One of the things we really wanted the body in our film to kind of remain a little bit anonymous because there is a sort of horror to that being an anonymous, and the fact that it is and it should have a name and should be identified. But at the same time, we've found that audiences bring different things in their own background to it. So in Canada, I've had people approach me with the body representing things from a literal body to climate change and eco disaster to Canada's housing and accessibility crisis. And then going international, I see those same issues and even different ones come up in the body, in Cassandra's reaction in the apartment itself, which is really exciting to see that kind of life beyond just the festival, but in the viewers' minds.
Yeah, there is a lot of good symbolism with that, like you point out. I agree with that, that not recognizing the body, it adds another element. It's like nobody even knows who he is, or even, that adds a whole different level. You just of creep factor.
It
So
does. It does. And it's been really funny to see, I've had people have completely different reactions to what I had making it, where I had one person who had seen it at a couple different venues over the time, and they came back mentioning that every time they watch it, they look for killer in the different people. And I'm like, I never thought about that. And they're like, no, first time I watched it, it's the first person she sees. That's the killer. And then the next time I'm like, well, maybe it's not a killer. Maybe it's a natural. And then the third time they're like, no, it's definitely this third person that I saw. It's really interesting because I never saw it as a murder mystery, but you could absolutely watch the film in that light.
yep, it would definitely raise it up. So we've talked about your film now before it's kind of going that way. So let's jump back a bit and talk a little bit about Brenna. So
Yes.
w- looking back through your life, it's, what was your inspiration? What was your desire? What triggered you to want to become a filmmaker?
I think I've always wanted to be a storyteller. From the very beginning. I remember even in like grade one, we had a teacher who made these art pieces for each student as a goodbye. And for me, she gave me this storyteller one. And it was the first time somebody had ever presented that as an option of a career, even though it was it's grade one. It was played mainly for, here you go, here's a thing. But it made a huge difference. And I think watching films and finding that language through film and slowly coming to the realization that that was something I truly loved over time became stronger and stronger. And many of my formative moments have been in cinemas. I mentioned earlier Pan's Labyrinth was my thesis topic. And for me, I was the same age as Ophelia in that movie when I went and saw it. And I remember it was late at night. I went with my mom and my grandma, and I remember I was wearing red turtleneck. And I remember that because I spent most of the movie either cowering under it or wiping tears because I was hysterically sobbing. My mom had to remind me to like breathe because I was making too much noise. But that moment, it was kind of one of the most moving experiences of my life. It completely changed everything about the way I understand film and sympathetic horror and fairy tales in general and literature informing film. And all of those moments kind of came together to become a director and a writer, which I'm still, finding inspiration at the cinema. That is my favorite place to be. And it's why I ended up creating a film blog during the early days of COVID pandemic, because I was stuck at home and needed something to kind of motivate and bring hope. And so I created my film blog, You Remind Me of the Frame, where I write and analyze about some of my favorite films, talking about the different little elements in them and what makes them so fantastic through those details.
I'm gonna take a quick note on that right now. You remind me of the frame.
Yeah, you remind me of the frame.ca. We've got, I think, about 160 articles. I'm on a little break from it now, but I've written articles on some of my favorite films. I did a whole collection on the different Phantom of the Opera adaptations, and what makes each of them so different and fantastic. A couple on Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and just kind of drawing, essentially continuing my work of my thesis of talking about little details and how they create meaning in film and in a larger conversation on genre.
Okay. Now it seems like you have a real pull towards horror.
I do, much to my poor mom's disdain. She's very supportive, but the horror it can be a lot. And I think a lot of my films, they're not necessarily completely gore filled necessarily. I think, a lot of them dwell on anxiety and the different expressions of horror, while still including a good amount of gore in specific moments. I think finding what makes people uncomfortable is a really interesting thing, and studying horror, going decade by decade and finding what has made people uncomfortable and how it is continuing to grow is something I find really interesting.
I think the psychological horror is something that's much stronger than just gore. Years ago, I attended a writing conference, and there
Mm.
was a panel of gore versus horror. So I understand
Yeah.
what you mean. It's like, yeah, you can have it there, but it's really that underlying, just like what you present here. It's that slow build of dread and the hook, and you're just kind of going,
Yeah.
what's going on?
It can be really strange, the gore. I find that there are moments where, like, there are certain injuries I think that can be really interesting to show in film. I think Guillermo del Toro talks about stabbing somebody in an armpit, and that's such a visceral kind of thing where you really hate the thinking of that, and that can be something really interesting and horrific to play with, but not to play with, hopefully, but in film to play with, which is that weird realm of making horror movies and dealing with the kind of setup and then the result of it and looking at violence. But I think for me, I come at it from a very analytical position, just having, come at it and studied it and looked at the history of it. And so while I'm not always the most gruesome person in certain films, it's always something I appreciate others doing and find really interesting nuances in very big, not nuances moments of, like, very, very violent things can be really, really nuanced in strange ways.
Yep. Yeah, it has a unique draw to it all.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about what spot got you into storytelling, why, horror is playing a part in it, and what you're kind of working on and possibly a feature film. Is
Mhm.
there anything else that we can kind of look forward and say, this is what Brenna is working on?
A few things. A few things are, many are in the early days. I would really love to do, I'm very interested in apartment horror. I find it a very interesting and underutilized idea and topic in horror because I see many horror haunted house stories. And for me, I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but in Vancouver, I don't know anybody that lives in a house. It's become something that's completely inaccessible to many of us, and we all live in these apartment buildings where you end up 30 floors above, up in the sky, surrounded by people you don't know. And I think that that is a really quite terrifying place to be. So I'm hoping to work on an anthology series focusing on a specific apartment building, that's set in Vancouver. I have another short I would love to do. I don't want to reveal too much of it, but it is essentially a Betty Boop inspired horror short film. That would be very, very horrific in a unique kind of take that I think could be very fun. It would be, somewhat musical, but that would end up being part of the horror. So I'll leave it at that. And I also have a pilot for a television show called Bog Girl. That is about a bog body that is unearthed in a small BC town where there is a secret organization that has been running things for a very long time, and a woman that's forced to return to her small town to uncover that mystery.
So I have to tell you, I've never thought about putting Betty Boop into a horror. So that's
I I think it's a really fun place in a horrible way. There's
I,
a lot of interesting things that were happening when Betty Boop was becoming, and a lot of what it became to stand for,
yeah.
that I think, everything from male gaze to horror cinema, the little inspirations of cartoon logic that you see created in Betty Boop and then sprung about in different genres, and I is really cool. And that's something I would love to be able to do with this short film, is to explore the history of cinema, kind of using a Betty Boop like character, as inspiration, as a kind of token of that.
I can, I, I'd be interested in seeing that. You got my
I appreciate
imagination
that.
really going with that one.
I
Uh,
appreciate it.
so let's put it this way. You talk about your own projects here
Mm,
and some of the ones you'd like to do. But like if you had an opportunity to do anything, what would be
mm.
your dream project?
Goodness. It's a tough question. I think, Frankenstein is definitely up there. I know that Guillermo del Toro is currently doing his. So I think that would be maybe a not possible project, but one I would love to do is an adaptation of Phantom of the Opera. based on the book and making it as horrific as that source material. There was one from I think it was 1989 that starred um, Freddy Krueger himself. Is it Robert England? I'm always unsure with the pronunciation of the last name. I think it might be, but he stars as the Phantom in that one, and it is quite fantastic and brutal. It combines my favorite things in films, which is time travel. It's literal time travel in that one, but usually it can be nostalgia or a period piece or something. Opera music and excessive violence. So those are the three things that I love seeing in a film that I try and always include in my own films. And for me, the 1989 Phantom of the Opera is so wonderful, and it inspired me to make my own Phantom of the Opera. One day, maybe a mini series that would be inspired by all the different adaptations that have come before, because we essentially have a Phantom adaptation every 10 years or so, not just the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, but different takes, and many of them very viciously rejecting the Andrew Lloyd Webber version in kind of strange ways. And I would love to kind of include my own take on that one day.
Yeah, there's some very strange ones out there. You mentioned that time frame I was thinking just before this when they did the one that was kind of the disco set Phantom of the
Is
Opera.
yeah, is that Phantom of the Paradise?
Yeah.
I love that movie.
I'm a B flick person. What can I say? Uh,
It's a good one. Yeah.
a lot of fun there, and a lot. It sounds like you've got a real drive into the very classic horror, which is kind of fun to hear because so many people are looking now at trying to create new franchises. It seems like you'd be very comfortable in settling into an old franchise and showing just how horrific some of that source material truly is.
It is. And I studied adaptation. That was kind of my main focus when I was doing my university work, was talking about both film adaptations but book adaptations of films, which can be really strange. A lot of interesting novels have been released after films come out with their own like novelization. So I'm interested in both sides of it, but I find that the stories that are familiar can often tell a whole lot about ourselves. And in horror, I think it's the most political genre in a very outright way. And those politics are constantly shifting. So when we use a story that is old and put a certain new attention to it, I think a lot of interesting things can happen. And at the same time, sometimes they're not always direct adaptations. With I Can't Go On, the short film, it's really the story of Cassandra and the Trojan horse that was the main kind of huge inspiration for the structure of it, where in that story of Cassandra and the Trojan horse, she is somebody who is able to see the future but never be believed. And there's a horror to that, as she is constantly trying to tell people that there is this Trojan horse that will come and that there will be men inside of it that will slaughter all of Troy. And no one believes her. And despite that fact, she keeps trying and keeps trying. And that was kind of the inspiration for our Cassandra, of this person who's able to see that there is a great horror and knows that it's wrong and tries to do something about it. But at the very end, the needs of the many needing to ignore this becomes too overwhelming, and she too is kind of forced into this fate that she was, able to see was wrong, but still has to go forward with it. So I'm interested in adaptation, but there's always a little bit of a shift than what has previously been in that canon, and trying to find what makes that modern.
Now you've really got me curious because I could go on this topic very much because, in
You could
fact,
go
in
on.
in about a month from now, the 1st of December, going to be on a panel at a writers convention,
Mm.
an event, and it's about the panel I'm on is about adapting
Oh
works
yeah.
across media.
Yeah.
And you kind of hit on some of the key points that I always tell people is because this is going to be a very fan based one. I know if the fans are going to be coming going, oh, I want this book turned into this movie. And it's
Yeah.
like, it doesn't work quite that way.
No, and I find the most accurate, if we're in that, even that term accurate, when you're getting into like romance terms of how faithful a work is, as though it owes you something in a romantic relationship, which is a really strange way to approach these things. But the more accurate, if you want to use those words, are often doing very strange things with the material, even though they are accurate. I think, if we're talking like horror films, the new Invisible Man that came out a few years ago, taking on both the original H.G. Wells, I think it was, story, and the early film, it's doing something completely different with it. And at the same time, that form of adaptation is kind of faithful to what the insane universal monster was.
Yeah.
of this kind of lunatic who I think has the biggest death count of any Universal classic movie monster because he kills an entire train of people. So you have it where he kills an entire train of people versus the modern where it's just victimizing one person and those around her, and they're
Mhm.
given the same kind of attention, which says something really interesting.
It does. It does. So, like I said, I could really get off on this topic with
I
you.
know, me too. It's tempting. It really is. I think my work as well, it tends to open itself to a lot of different. I heard somebody watch it and really saw Rocky Horror because we have a moment with some lips big on camera. That was an inspiration, I guess, that I didn't even know I was putting in, but those sort of things I tend to, as my blog is called, You Remind Me of the Frame. I tend to collect frames from different movies and find inspiration in them in a lot of different ways.
Okay, so we've talked about things you're doing within film.
Mm.
So to get that break away where you try to rejuvenate the creativity and kind of relax away from it, what do you do to relax and be away from the film?
I tend to make embroideries based on films, so it's not really an escape, unfortunately. It's sort of a, and then I embroider while watching films, but that tends to be what I do. It's kind of a stabbing hobby, which is it gets some release of anger out, I suppose. But that's kind of the hobby. I also studied opera for a time and kind of like more ballad-based musical theater. So that was really both inspirational in, my own interest in things like Phantom of the Opera and including opera music in film, but just also a big release. I think it can be incredibly therapeutic where it's not screaming necessarily. It has a bit of a rhythm to it, but there are definitely overlaps to those sort of releases and focusing on those.
I have a friend that writes horror and does needlework. And
It's a common overlap. I'm not too sure what it says.
and she has a shirt she wears every so often that says, "Don't bother me. I'm willing to stab something hundreds of times."
Yeah, it's a lot of dedication. I finished one the other day for Over the Garden Wall, which is one of my favorite things to rewatch this time of the year, and it can be really fun to like do a little embroidered skeleton with a pumpkin on his head and to play around in that realm and to find art and make it your own in some ways. It's all sort of a Frankenstein creation of all of these different, bodies and interests all coming together in film and in other works that I end up doing.
Okay. As we're kind of drawing to a close, I'm going to ask you a question I ask basically everybody. If
Mm,
you had someone come to you and say, "I want to become a filmmaker,"
yeah.
what advice would you give them?
Um, Probably to read. I think that would be to the biggest thing, at least in my own career, that helped me was to read stories and to watch stories. But reading, I think, especially finding the things that you want to read, especially if you're someone who isn't necessarily drawn to literature and kind of just wants to approach film from film itself. I think there's definitely a path for that, but finding the stories that move you and the elements that do, and finding what that says about you as a creator and in the stories that you create can be really helpful, and being decisive in that as well, knowing what you love and being very vocal about it. I always find, in horror you can tell a lot about a person and how they react to horror, but I think in the things that you love you can tell a lot about a person, more so than the things they hate, because there is something that takes a little bit more strength than hating to love something and to proudly declare that you love it and that's what inspires you. So those would be the things I would say. Read a lot, find what you love, and to just kind of go through those together to create your work.
Okay. So moving forward, if people wanted to follow your work, where would they be able to find you on the out there on the web?
Instagram is a good spot. I'm at Brenna Goodwin 1. You can also follow our short film there. I think we are at I period can't go on film. So each I can't go on is spliced by a period. Um, those would be the best places to find me. I also have my company Hearth Pictures, which is what I operate through. So I have a website there, hearthpictures.ca. And if you're interested in reading any of my writing on different films and some of the bizarre tangents that we end up going on, you can find some of my writing work at youremindmeoftheframe.ca.
All right. And then just a final thing for you. Any final comments, call outs, recommendation, anything you'd like to say to everybody?
Well, I would love to thank my entire team. that made I Can't Go On. Our film, we made it in 8 days through the Crazy Eights filmmaking challenge, and many of our creators were women or women identifying, and many of them were complete volunteers who came onto a project. We filmed it all in 3 days. It was a mad dash to create it, and it was wonderful. And we've had an amazing run through since then, and I'm so incredibly proud. So when you see this film, please know that so many people came to work on it. People like, our lead producer, Dominique Roy, our cinematographer, Jake Kamal, so many different people. Our production designer, Isabel Baker Smith, who created everything you see, our entire set, in a matter of days, and lots of Red Bull, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But everything you see in our film was built, other than the stairs. I didn't make her build the stairs this time, but who's to say next time? But we had an amazing team. All of the department and those heads, they were really just absolute rock stars, and we're really proud of the film and excited to bring it to you, with you personally, and to the audiences listening here, and to FilmQuest. We're really excited to have that audience.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And everybody, thank you for joining us as we talk with Brenna about I Can't Go On, showing this year at the Film Quest Film Festival. Get tongue-tied there sometimes.
Mm,
And you're going to have more stuff coming to the end, and it looks like you're going to have it available for everybody at one point or another.
that's
So
right.
my recommendation is, if you can, get out in the theater and see it. I mean, these movies are made to be seen on a bigger screen. It makes a big difference. It's a lot of fun that way. And supporting the independent artists of all types is a great thing that we really try to promote. So if you like what we're doing here, please like this, share it out, get other people to see the works. And thank you, Brenna, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Lovely chatting
Okay.
with
Talk to
you.
everybody soon.